Welcome to our virtual program with Turnstile Tours. My name is Andrew Gustafson. I should just mention before we bring on our guest that today is Earth Day. So that was one reason why we wanted to do this program on this particular day. So we thought a celebration of Prospect Park and a celebration of the trees and all green spaces across New York would be a great way to celebrate. I also just mentioned that all the proceeds from tonight's program are going to go and benefit our friends at Prospect Park. Some of you may have seen in the news, there was some recent vandalism and people spread trash all over the park the other day. And big shout out to all the staff and really the dedicated armies of volunteers that came out yesterday and today to help clean up the park. But I want to bring on our guest, Allison Meyer, who's going to tell us a little bit about herself and about her project as we walk our way, both virtually and in person with Cindy across some of these great trees of New York. So, hey, Allison, how are you doing?
Awesome. Hey, Andrew, thanks for having me.
Of course. So first of all, tell us where you're joining us from, because you're actually not too far from where Cindy's standing, right?
Yeah, I could probably go there in like 5 minutes, but I'm on the east side of Prospect Park, like across an ice skating rink. So yeah, the trees that Cindy visits, I see like almost every single day. So it's kind of fun to share something that's become so important to me this past year, just like in terms of getting out and kind of keeping sane.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do, and how that kind of led into this project about the great trees of New York? And we're going to talk more about this beautiful map that you're going to show us in more detail. But yeah, tell us a little bit about your work, Allison.
Yeah, so my while I would like to be like a full-time tree enthusiast, I'm mainly like a writer about art and culture and history, but I got interested in how trees kind of like intersect with all those subjects. And the company I did this map for, I also did a concrete New York map, which is like concrete buildings like the TWA terminal and Guggenheim, and also Art Deco New York. There it is. And I was just like it was very cool because like Blue Crow Media has a very dedicated like architecture audience, but trees are so essential to cities. And I think it's like a great way to look at cities, to look at history, to look at culture. And yeah, it wasn't something I always thought about, which I'll talk about, but like for a long time I kind of had like tree blindness, where I appreciate a good tree, like I like shade, I like spring flowers, but I wasn't looking at them as individuals until like I started to kind of become obsessed with the first tree we're gonna see in Prospect Park that Cindy's at, and then here we are.
And yeah. Some people who are joining may know you for the work that you do in another kind of green space.
Oh yeah. You're better at telling my biography than me. Yeah, I'm also a licensed tour guide, and my main tour guide area is Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. I've also given tours like Woodlawn Cemetery, Hartsdale Pet Cemetery. I have given a Great Trees of Greenwood tour, which was a real fusion of everything. And so I know a lot about cemeteries too, and it was kind of alongside like getting to know them as essential natural spaces that my interest in trees really grew, like in thinking about them both as part of the past and the future, and like how places like even a cemetery can contribute to that biodiversity.
Yeah, I mean, there's such essential green spaces, and obviously during the pandemic, any kind of green space has been welcome respite for so many people. We live where I am. I'm in Windsor Terrace, so Prospect Park is about 5 blocks that way, and Greenwood Cemetery is 2 blocks that way. So
yeah, nice.
It's also been great how Greenwood and other cemeteries have extended their hours, opened up additional gates, and encouraged people to enjoy the space during the pandemic.
Yeah, and this is one of those like I completed this map before the pandemic, and complications I could never have foreseen came up. Like, we were hoping to get all those beautiful photographs of the cherry blossoms. Then the Brooklyn Botanic Garden closed and it wasn't safe to go out. So like, I'm excited though to release it at this time, because I think it's like with spring again and more people getting out, it ended up being the perfect time. But it's like, it's interesting how much more important it even became to my life this past year. Like, even before I started this project thinking like trees are cool, and I've ended this year being like, if I don't go to Prospect Park every day, I will unravel. So.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of people. We just posted the link in the chat if you want to order it, but you can use this as this summer's like checklist to try and find all of them. Can you tell us a little bit about what great trees means, right? Because this is like an official designation as well for New York City Parks, right?
Yeah, so there is about in 2015, I set out on this mission to try to see every single official great tree in the city, just because there is something very interesting to me about like, what is a great tree? Like, what makes a tree great? I just thought that was kind of a funny and strange idea. And it also was like a way to see parts of the city I'd never seen before, like, and to see areas in my own neighborhood I never had really paid attention to before. So, but that list was created in 1985, the year I was born, not to give away how old I am, but like, and so obviously a lot has changed since then. Like, some of those trees are not here anymore. It's kind of surprising some omissions on that list too, like the alley pond giant that I'll mention, which is like considered the tallest and oldest tree in the city, isn't on that list. So when I was like looking at the 50 trees to include on this list, I was thinking about like all the different things that makes a tree great. So the map includes definitely like old trees, historic trees, really big trees, rare trees, but also like trees that have kind of survived against the odds, trees that like were a part of community garden movement. So I was kind of looking at it as much as like a history of the city and the people that have shaped it as the trees themselves.
Yeah, and I think we're going to go to Cindy in just a second
Yeah.
and take a look at one of the trees that was really influential for you and helping you get started on this project, right?
Yeah. So I don't know, like, if Cindy, if you're right at the Camperdown Elm, but it is like one of the I'll say it's the strangest tree in the city. We'll give it that title. And I just remember seeing it for the first time and being like so struck by it, because as you can tell in this live video from the park, it's so exciting. You can see it has like this fence around it that no other tree has, and it has this big crutch holding up one of its branches, and it's got like cords and wires and everything. And I was like, what is going on here? And I saw it even had like this plaque that included like a few lines from a poem by Marion Moore. And like, I know about Marion Moore, super influential modernist poet, and it kind of pulled me down the rabbit hole of trying to think about trees in the city and like people that have saved them, because she was very influential in like drawing attention to this tree. It was like not in great shape in 1960, and she was already part of this. She was like very late in her career. She already had a Pulitzer. She had a National Book Award. She was kind of retired, but she'd become, oh, there's Salty the dog too. We're a special guest. She had become like part of this Greensward Foundation organization that she called like her only mortal entanglement at the time. And she like got involved in protecting the boathouse, which is right next to here. So when the tree was in a bad state, she got asked if she would write a poem for it, and it got published in the New Yorker. And she wrote about like, at the time there was this painting at the New York Public Library that now is at Crystal Bridges, Kindred Spirits. And she kind of compared it to like, if these two people in this Hudson River painting had been able to see this Camperdown elm, would have not maybe they'd seen great trees in Paris and in the Hudson Valley and wherever, but surely they would have been, you know, just transfixed by this tree. And it kind of like worked. It drew people's attention to the tree. It like got them started fundraising. They were able to patch up some holes in it. And when she died in 1972, I believe, she actually like left some money to be like a fund to protect trees all over the park. So, and it's exciting. There's a crowd gathering at the tree. This is great. It's interesting. Like, I think if you stop to look at it, it kind of creates like a chain reaction where people start looking at it too. So I'm glad we started that today. But yeah, this is kind of like my gateway great tree that I started to look at like this list. And there's about 60 trees on the Great Trees of New York list. And I don't know if like it's easy, if Cindy, you want to like, if we should swing around to the other neighboring great trees, or if you want to, yeah, or do you want to take a closer look under the Camperdown elm? We can savor its
Sure,
like
we
weird.
can do that.
We can push in on it.
Yeah, I'll ask people in the chat too. Like, are you, if you're not in New York, this is a great chance to see this tree. But if you are, I recommend checking it out because it goes through some interesting seasons. And right now, it's got those really beautiful light green leaves that like the elms get. So a Camperdown elm, I kind of breezed by what it is, but on the Earl of Camperdown's estate in Scotland, they found this like abnormal elm that they said was creeping on the ground like a vine. And so this tree, like you have to graft it onto another tree for it to grow. So that's why like some of them end up more sort of slumped to the ground. And this one is pretty old. It was one of the plants that was gifted after Prospect Park opened. Like they got a lot of gifts of like quote unquote exotic plants. And this was from a local florist. And he probably has one of the earliest Camperdown. It was like one of the earliest ones we planted in the city. So it's kind of remarkable that it survives. And I know it looks like a million years old, but it also looks that way, 50 years ago too. It's sort of a tree that looks eternally like cursed in some way. but yeah, that is great. This is a great visual tour of it.
Yeah, and it was planted after Prospect Park had already opened, but it's one of the oldest trees in the park, and it's really hard. There are not very many trees that are older than the park itself that have survived. So 150 is right around the age of the oldest trees you'll find in the park.
Yeah.
I also just wanted to ask people again. So if you want to drop into the chat, like what makes a tree great for you, or what's a meaningful tree near where you live in New York City or anywhere else. But yeah, thanks so much, Cindy, for showing us the Camperdown elm. It's so beautiful. No cats in it though, I see.
No,
Yeah.
there's no cats today. Although if my camera shakes, it's because Salty's pulling on the leash a little bit.
Well, she'd be pulling a lot more if there was a cat. There are some
that is true.
Some strays that hang out in the tree sometimes.
Is there any specific feature or detail that you'd like me to show everybody here?
I think you're close to a really great twisty branch there that's being held up kind of like by a crutch.
Yes.
Yeah, where you can really see how they how it grows in a sort of like gnarled way. And you can see one of the wires coming through there that's bracing it. They kind of are like giant bonsai trees. Like they require a lot of care to keep them. This is not a natural. I mean, we can talk, I'm sure, Andrew, a lot about the unnaturalness of Prospect Park, but this is like an especially unnatural feature of it, because like this is a very much a human-made tree of like grafting this abnormality onto another elm. And it's also remarkable that it's like, it's had after I wrote about this tree for Brooklyn Based, I think in 2012, Hurricane Sandy happened, and I was like, oh, that it looked so bad, but it's gone. And they were like, they actually emailed me, the Prospect Park Alliance, after Sandy, and they're like, it was fine. They're like, we have to let this lady know the tree is okay. Obsessed about it. But yeah, it did lose one of its big branches, I think about a year ago, but it's still, it's coming back again. It's still hanging in there.
I do have an update, which is that there is a CAT in the tree. I'm not going to say the word because I don't want our dog barking. But can you see if you look like towards the big trunk? I'm not sure if you can see it through Zoom.
Yeah, there's a cat that lives inside the second branch to the ground, I think, it's hanging
Maybe
out
people
there.
can make out in that little nook. He's hanging out in there.
Yeah, I mean, and the cat really blend in. Oh, I said the word. But really blend in, except for his or her nose, which is white. So you can kind of see that peeking out. But Allison, you were just mentioning that there's a branch that's down here, and I can show that as well.
Yeah, I think it was about a year ago, because I distinctly remember, being deep in COVID, walking by my favorite tree and a branch being down, and it being the worst thing of my life. And I was relieved, though, that it's, I think what I've also appreciated is you can't get too attached to trees. They're individuals like us. They live their lifespans, and then, that's it. So we kind of get to see them at whatever point of their lives they're at, and it's still got another summer in it, so I'm excited to see
that's such
back.
This direction, it's such a great view of the tree and those sort of two trunks. I don't think I look at the tree very much from this vantage point. Wonderful. Well, that's one down, 49 to go. The trees on your map. But Cindy, maybe if you turn around, you can see another one of the great trees on the map. And maybe we can talk about this one a little bit.
Yeah, so that's the Japanese Pagoda tree. It's another official New York City great tree. I really like it because I don't think anyone's on it right now, but it's a really popular climbing tree. I like that it also has kind of like a changing season around it. Like in the winter, it's a really popular skiing hill. And in late summer, there's really beautiful white flowers. So despite its name, the Japanese Pagoda tree is actually from China. And it has some like really interesting lore around it. Like it was long used as a grave marker for Buddhist monks. And when it's seen kind of like out in the wild by itself, it does look a little bit like ghostly when it has those white flowers in the summer. So there's some stories about like spirits living inside the tree. Its flowers also are used for tea in China, and it's got wood that's like used for decorative carving. And this one is especially like impressive. They usually are about between like 50 to 75 feet, but New York City Parks says this one is 86 feet tall. So it's like a very, big example. You'll definitely see smaller ones though. They're very popular as street trees because they're pretty tolerant of like extreme weather and pests and everything. But this one is like an especially incredible example. And I think it sometimes gets like overshadowed by the Camperdown elm in terms of its interestingness, but it's so, the branches are just beautiful. And especially like when you see it in late summer, it's just like beautiful when you get to catch the flowers there.
And Howie just mentioned in the chat that it almost looks like this tree also needs wires supporting its branches, but those branches sticking straight out, they're holding themselves up.
Yeah, it seems good so far. Yeah, I haven't looked. I don't think it has wires, but if it got older, yeah, no, I always think it's kind of funny too when they prop up the tree with wood, where you're like propping it up with a dead tree, but I'm sure they don't mind. Yeah.
Yeah, it's got those branches low to the ground, perfect for kids to climb on.
Yeah, and while I get distressed when I see people climbing very old, fragile trees, this one is like I think it's a good one to climb. I'll say it's okay to climb. Just
Yeah.
don't go crazy.
Yeah, and then while we're out here, there's one more that's now behind you, Cindy. That's also one that I think kids really love to play around in, and so that's the one that's dead in front of us right now.
Yeah, and this is a great view because it's like you really get to take in how huge it is. So this is one of the other official great trees. We're crossing them off the list really fast here. And it's also considered to have one of the widest trunks in the city. It's about 144 inches wide. And when you get close though, you'll see it's not just one trunk, like it has kind of like this growth of trunks out of it to form that beautiful like triangle of branches. And this is, I can't remember if I already said an American hornbeam, but they also have a common name of musclewood and ironwood because they have a kind of like sinewy bark that we'll see up close. And they're also like a very tough tree, like their wood doesn't split that easily. So they actually used to be used to make hammers. And in the summer, it has like really, bright green foliage. And then if you come in the fall, it turns this really sunny yellow.
I recently learned that in the 19th century, this wood was prized in Canada for making hockey sticks.
That's awesome. I mean, it makes it's like apparently a very like tough wood. So it's the musclewood name, I guess. Oh yeah, you can see how it kind of looks very like it just looks like a strong tree. It's got muscles. And it's just dense too at the bottom with like all those trunks kind of coming out of the ground.
Yeah, it almost looks like a giant, it's sort of like an overgrown bush.
Well, yeah, and I should mention this is usually, hornbeams are not uncommon, but they're usually what's called like an understory tree. So they're not the biggest trees in the forest, like they're usually more like shrub-like, so that this one's had the time and the space to get to this size is also really incredible.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Great. So these are three of the four great trees in Prospect Park that we've seen, and we'll see the fourth one a little bit later on. But we're going to expand beyond Prospect Park and talk about some other trees you can find elsewhere in the city. But we'll rely on photographs and Allison's description. We won't get to see them live.
Yeah, right, thank you so much, Cindy. This was great.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, well, there's just one thing I wanted to mention. Well, two things I want to mention real quick. One is if folks are interested, if you're ever curious about a tree in Prospect Park, they've done a census of about half the trees in the park. And there's a database which you can pull up on your phone, and it's geolocated and find information about 15,000 trees. The other thing, going back to our conversation about the Camperdown elm and the Marianne Moore poem, I just wanted to mention this book, which is the guidebook that was written about Prospect Park in 1967. Yeah, in large part inspired by Marianne Moore by Clay Lancaster. So this is one of my favorite resources about the park. But again, very part of that real inspiration that poem and that tree created.
I love that. It's got a great cover too. Yeah, and if I didn't mention it,
Andrew and Allison.
Oh yeah. What's up, Cindy?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's just the sun is just reflecting off the boathouse in a beautiful way, and since it's related to the topic of discussion, I thought I'd let you know.
Yeah, and she, it's hard to imagine right now that this building was ever left to decay, but it was also in pretty bad shape around the same time the Camperdown elm had declined. And not just Marianne Moore, but also Friends of Prospect Park that came out of that, like have done so much to kind of draw attention to the park. And as somebody who writes about art, I really like Marianne Moore's story, because I think we think like, what good can poetry do? It seems so esoteric, and I love a story of like, you can use art and writing and things to galvanize people to care about something. And so I think it's like a really powerful story.
Yeah. That's wonderful. All right, Sind. Thanks so much.
Beautiful. Everyone go outside after this, wherever you are. But stay inside at least a half an hour more. Yeah, so should I share my screen now?
Yeah, let's dive in.
Great. So can you see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, cool. And I did see that like Howard asked about the trees deliberately planted and they're naturally, like Prospect Park is a very deliberate landscape, but a lot of our oldest trees, they predate when people were planting things. Like Prospect Park had an actual like tree moving machine, right? Like every single tree was placed like it was in a brushstroke in a painting. But if you go into our old growth forest, which we do have like a few scarce areas, you'll find some of the oldest trees in the city. What makes a tree great? Like obviously size and age, that's a good marker for greatness. So this is our record holder. The one that often gets cited is the Alley Pond Giant, which is up in Queens in Alley Pond Park. And it's considered the city's oldest tree and also the city's tallest tree, but it's not actually that deep into the forest. Like it's really just off the expressway in the park. And in 2000, it was measured at over 134 feet tall, and it's thought to be over 350 years old, which is like pretty old for New York if you think about like it was just a sapling when in the 17th century the Dutch West India Company sent families to live in Manhattan. And next to it in this slide is the sign that used to be there. It has been replaced. But the artist, Rachel Owens, who did a really beautiful exhibition casting the trunk in glass, which I wrote about, she had this up in the gallery. And I like that it reads at the end, treat this oldest Sylvan citizen of our city with the respect it deserves. And, this is maybe one of our last kind of witnesses to the entire span of the city's history from the Dutch metropolis to now. So it's a really incredible tree. And it does have competition on Staten Island. You're a great tree too when you have like a name. So this is the Colossus of Clove Lakes Park. And it's also estimated to be over 3 centuries old. And it was measured around the same time as the Alley Pond Giant to be over 119 feet tall. So not too far behind. And these are both tulip trees. So tulip trees are kind of like our city elders. They grow taller than our other New York trees, and they survive for centuries while other beings here, we live and die in generations. And they also have these very like distinctive leaves. I picked this one up in the park this week. I think a squirrel must have been eating one of the early flowers because it like was on a branch that dropped to the ground. And this is like the tiny leaves that have just emerged, but they get huge, like as big as my face. And they have these very distinctive 4-lobed kind of mask-like leaves that are bright green in summer and then turn this vivid yellow in the fall. So you won't see the leaves though on the tall trees because they tend to like lose their lower branches and create these beautiful like candelabras up in the sky. So you will likely know you're near a tulip tree when you see a leaf on the ground, pick it up, you're like, where is it? Oh, and then see the super tall tree like nearby. And tulip trees have a real long history of the city too. Like one of them is said to have been the tree that they did the exchange in 1626 between the Dutch colony director Peter Inwood and the indigenous people that the Dutch interpreted as the sale of Manhattan. And that tree actually lived until 1938 until it died. It was even taller than the Colossus. If you go up to Inwood Hill Park in Manhattan, you can actually find like a boulder marking where it once stood. And there are older trees, though they're not in parks. They're kind of just like out among us. And these are a couple of examples I've visited. I'll say we switch a little bit between photographs I took, and I'm not a photographer, and photographs Colin Montgomery took for the map that are gorgeous. So these are a couple of mine. And on the left is the dinosaur, again, great tree. You know you're great when you have a name. And there's a lot of city lore that supposedly George Washington passed beneath here on September 21st, 1776, while the British occupied city burned. So it's nicknamed the dinosaur because it's super old. It also measures 60 inches in diameter, so it's Manhattan's biggest street tree. And it's likely it was here, way before anything we see in this photo. Is probably planted on the Morris Jumel Mansion estate, which used to be this area. And then to the right there, and I should say that's an English elm. And to the right, we have another old English elm in Washington Square Park, the Hangman's elm, which is often cited as the oldest tree in Manhattan. Despite its name, though, no executions are ever recorded as taking place here, although there's a lot of ghost tours that may tell you otherwise. But if you look, at its sturdy branches, all these kind of weird, creepy, crooked angles, it's easy to see why it got this very ominous story. I do find it strange, though, that no one was hanged from this tree, but there is some very real dark history, which is that Washington Square Park used to be a potter's field. It was like our public burial ground. And in fact, just a few weeks ago, Greenwood Cemetery had some grave diggers reinter people there who had been disinterred during the recent renovation. So the dead are still very much among us in Washington Square Park, but no one was hanged from the Hangman's Elm, even though it has certainly witnessed some very, dramatic changes around us, from Potter's Field to NYU area. So, another thing that makes a tree great is they're giant. So we already saw the American hornbeam in Prospect Park, which is one of the biggest trunks in the city. But another contender is the Caucasian wingnut in the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, which has probably the silliest name of a very, formidable tree, but it's actually named from Caucasus, where it's from, as well as the wing-like catkins, those long strands of flowers you can see in the bottom left photo. The Botanic Garden planted this as a sapling in 1922, was a gift from Rome. And, after almost a century, it's just grown to incredible sizes. It has a height of about 45 feet, and that its trunk is 120 inches wide. And if you look at it, it just looks like something kind of weird, like fairy tale tree. Recently, it had a bunch of bluebells crocuses were blooming beneath it too. So it's also an interesting tree to visit across the seasons. There are also a couple of trees that have been designated city landmarks, although only one is still surviving. This is the Southern Magnolia, which is on Lafayette Avenue in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. This was planted in 1885, and you can tell it's now taller than the brownstones alongside it. And it's really rare for a magnolia to be this far north, especially one this old. And it stands only thanks to the woman who's commemorating this really moving mural just below there, where you see her face kind of coming out of the branches. That is activist Hattie Carson. She was a community activist in the 1960s, and she lived in Bed-Stuy and noticed there really weren't trees at all, and the beautification had been majorly overlooked in her neighborhood. And so she started helping to teach youth about tree care, and also leading the block associations to plant new trees. And she in particular didn't want their surviving old trees to be torn down. And when she heard a development was going to tear down the tree as well as the buildings next to it, she led this rallying to protect it. She worked with the local school kids. They sold these paper magnolia leaves to support its preservation, and it got designated an official landmark in 1970.
That's such a wonderful story. And trees are such an invaluable public asset, and often, just like other resources, they're often distributed very unequally in the city. We had a question from Howie, which is, are there any sort of markers for these trees that they are great trees? And this one sort of has a double designation of being a great tree and also being a New York City landmark.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it has been kind of surrounded by this scaffolding for several years too. which I hope comes down someday. But yeah, they don't have the great tree. Like, I did not steal this from the tree. I found this on the ground. A lot of trees in the parks have these kind of like markers, but I've never seen one designating it like a great tree. And I think that the great tree program like could be revived. I'd be happy to revive it. I give my free time to the parks department. But yeah, like you kind of have to seek some of them out. Like the Camperdown elm, it's got a sign, but the Magnolia, you know, you walk up to it, and I like that you can kind of get the whole story. Like you see this tree, you see this woman like depicted with the tree. She's got a magnolia flower on her blouse, and you can immediately get that this is a person that was really connected to it. Yeah, and I see in the chat Cindy is at the
Yeah,
Osage
so
Orange.
we can
Okay.
go through a few more, and we'll save her for the end.
Okay, we don't want to like spoil the end. Yeah, and so there was another living landmark that is no longer with us, which was the Weeping Beech in Flushing, Queens, and today's Weeping Beech Park. It was planted in 1847. Samuel Parsons, who ran a nursery there, like brought a lot of trees, were introduced kind of to North America through there, and he brought this Weeping Beech in a flower pot and planted it, and it really just like flourished, and it became it's considered the oldest Weeping Beech in the country, and that a lot of our Weeping Beeches descend from it. And if you go to the park now, it was sadly cut down in 1998. There were a lot of attempts to save it. It had lived 150 years, and it was just finally, you know, had met its end. But the Parks Department did not let its demise go unnoticed. They had an official funeral for it. And the Parks Commissioner at the time, Henry Stern, he was kind of an eccentric guy, said, "This is the vegetable equivalent of an Egyptian pharaoh going into his sarcophagus, surrounded by his adoring little offshoots. Because if you go there, you will see where the Weeping Beech once stood, but then a ring around it are all of its descendants from where its branches came down and sprouted new trees." And you can see my friend, I will say blessing upon all my friends who, when we were out for a completely unrelated event, and I was like, let's go see this tree, went with me. So I hope, thanks to Randall, who was there and indulged me in going to see the Weeping Beeches. And this one does have like a plaque, and it's also right by the Kingsland Homestead, which is a 1785 building where the Queens Historical Society is. And it was also like relocated to this park. So I like that there's like this area of Queens where you have the meeting of these like two historic transplants. There's one that's architectural, and then this other one that's ecological.
One thing I really enjoyed reading in the map was about how you talk about the different ways in which trees arrived in the city, because a lot of the trees that are on this list are not native to this area. So we've talked about a few that were planted ornamentally, but there's quite a few that arrived here more accidentally, right?
Yeah, like accidentally, do you mean like
maybe they're an exotic species that was brought here by ships, or, you know, stowed away with something else that was being imported?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's one in particular, but we could skip to, you know, it's cherry season, which is like, I don't know if you already know the story, but like, so our cherry blossoms that are around the Central Park Reservoir, like they were not the cherries we were supposed to have. Like the first shipment of them was lost at sea. They were supposed to arrive in time for the 300th anniversary of Henry Hudson coming into the harbor, but that steamer sank, and so Japan sent another shipment that arrived, you know, kind of late for the party, but they got here safely in 1912. And their Manhattan perhaps made a tactical error tourism-wise, because they got them the same time as Washington, D.C., but while D.C. planted all of theirs in one place for this really spectacular cherry grove, NYC put some at the reservoir, they put some in Sakura Park, they put some in Riverside Park, and all those groves date to this arrival. Not the Brooklyn Botanic Garden one, that is separate, but yeah, those are some that like definitely not native to New York, but they've become such like a seasonal, well, I call them a seasonal sensation on the slide, and really like an event, you know, when the cherry blossoms bloom. I will say too, cherries don't live a super long time. Like for them to live over a century is pretty, I mean, over 50 years is pretty rare. Mm-hmm. So at the reservoir, a lot of those are replacement trees, but there are a few old ones like this craggy kind of one I took a photo of there on the right. That is possibly one of the ones that dates back to the original planting. Yeah, and I think some like interesting other imports that we have here, like I mentioned that I'm really interested in trees that have kind of like a human history to them. And the Dawn Redwood is super interesting because they're considered living fossils. So they're like the sole living species of their genus. They're something that we have fossil records of going back millions of years, basically unchanged. And they did used to be in North America, but they were thought to be extinct until 1941 when a pair of them was found in this valley in China. And they started to be cultivated in the United States in 1948 in Boston. And people quickly figured out they make a really great city tree, interestingly. Like they're very resistant to disease and invasive insects. And they seem like they would be a really stupid idea for a city, though, because you're like, it's a redwood, like it gets over 100 feet tall. But they're very predictable the way they grow. They grow kind of just like straight up like skyscrapers. So I have a couple of ones here. The one on the right is an official great tree. The one on the left is not, curiously. The one on the right is like a right in the middle of Brooklyn Heights, just on a residential street. I actually like walked right past it when I was trying to find it because it doesn't look, you know, remarkable when you're seeing it, but then you're like, oh my God, that tree is so tall. And the same within the Liz Christie Community Garden. So this is New York City's first community garden. It was started by the Green Guerrillas. Liz Christie was one of their members, and they noticed all these vacant lots around the city and got really interested in if they could turn them into parks. And they also got interested in like what plants grow well in the city, and the Dawn Redwood is one of them. And now it's like just a really incredible, beautiful tree. And they renamed the garden after Liz Christie. She died in 1985. She was just 35 years old. But I like that kind of like her memory in this community garden movement is attached to this tree. Yeah, and do we have time? What's our?
Yeah,
how many more?
We can do a couple more.
Let's do.
Before we go to our last one with Cindy.
I'll share a couple more here. I think like, you know, I think about like some trees that you know are. And I also want to share some of Colin's photographs because he's such a better photographer than me. This is a beautiful photograph of the survivor tree. You know, a lot of trees have survived disasters in our city, like Hurricane Sandy, Dutch elm disease, which wiped out millions of trees, chestnut blight, and then the survivor tree, which was pulled from ground zero after the September 11th attacks. And it was like burned and had snapped roots, and NYC Parks very carefully and lovingly brought it back to health, and it was replanted there in 2010. As someone from Oklahoma too, I'm kind of interested in like the migration of survivor trees. Like New York has some saplings from the survivor tree at the Oklahoma City bombing site. There's also saplings from Anne Frank's house, and now they give saplings of this tree. Oh, and in Prospect Park, there's some saplings from trees that survived Fukushima. But this tree too, they give saplings to places that have endured disaster. And so I think it's interesting how trees kind of become the symbol of resilience, and not even the tree itself. It could just be kind of like this connection to their survival.
And this is one of my favorite kinds of trees. We have a Callery pear right outside our window right here.
Yeah.
Flowering right now. It's beautiful.
Oh yeah, this is a great time of year to go look at trees. Like you're either seeing their flowers like the cherry blossoms, tulip trees are gorgeous right now, magnolia trees, and we'll share I think what kind of wraps up my ideas of great trees before we jump to our prestige in the Prospect Park is the Pinetum in Central Park. It's one of those areas that's like beautiful year round, and it's an entire grove of trees. It's about 4 acres that was spearheaded in the 1970s by philanthropist Arthur Ross. He had read about this winter drive area that Olmsted and Vox had initially planned for the park, but it didn't make it into the 20th century. And he decided like he was going to kind of create this year-round place of beauty, and it has different pines from all over the world, like Macedonia, Japan, the Himalayas, and it kind of became like a living lab for what trees do well in urban environments. At the time when he planted it, he said, "My dream is to plant 1,000 pines in Central Park," and he got close. There's about 600 now, and I like on the small plaque there that you can find, it says, "This Pinetum, a gift to the city from an interested citizen, May 1973." And I think it's like a really, I just like simple sentiment that could accompany like any one of these trees, like that someone has maintained and loved and saved because they just took an interest in it. And with that, like, do we want to check out the Osage Orange tree?
Yeah, let's see if, well, first of all, since we're not going to see these fruit at this time of the year, why don't you tell us a little bit about the tree, and then we'll take a closer look at the actual tree.
Yeah, I also, actually, this is the perfect one to end on too, because it's a bit of like a nostalgic tree for me. This is a tree you find in Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Eastern Texas, all 3 states I have family in and I grew up in. And so I like grew up like really, you know, when you're a kid, and this is a perfect thing to throw at each other, but they're really interesting trees. They were actually used as like living fences because they grow really fast and they're pretty tough, and their bark, you can make like a yellow dye with it. But in the fall, you can see they actually have to put up sometimes hazard tape at Prospect Park because it causes a kind of like a dangerous scene. These softball-sized fruits fall on the ground, and it's believed that they were like, nobody eats them now, they're just there, and it's believed that it used to be some megafauna would have eaten them, but now they're just kind of like a nuisance. I recommend picking them up though. They have like a kind of like interesting citrusy smell, and some people say like they keep pests away in your house. I don't think there's any proof of that, but they're kind of like a nice thing to pick up and bring home. They look a little bit like brains. And this one that we're at in Prospect Park is especially old, and Frederick Law Olmsted really loved, so one of the, I feel like when I'm talking to a turnstile tour audience, they probably already know who Frederick Law Olmsted is, but just for due diligence, he designed Prospect Park, major landscape architect, and he was really a fan of Osage orange trees. There's actually a really old one at his house on Staten Island, and this one has a really gorgeous kind of like 2 trunks there that are braced by a couple of bars.
Yeah, why don't we we'll spotlight Cindy as because I know she's walking towards it right now.
Perfect.
All right. You mentioned Olmsted's home on Staten Island. I'll just give a quick plug on, we haven't posted it yet, but in early June, we're going to do a virtual tour of the Olmsted Beale House. So
oh, how cool.
Yeah, and those fruits you mentioned, it's so funny you said that thing about pests, because last year, before the pandemic, Cindy and I were visiting her family in Michigan, and we stopped at the farmer's market in Detroit, and there was someone who had a huge, like, refrigerator box size container filled with them, and they were selling them as spider repellent.
Oh, interesting.
Like, put them in your house to keep away spiders. But yeah, we can see those trunks.
Well, if there's any entrepreneurs here that want to come back here in the fall, you will have as many Osage oranges as you can carry. It's like astounding how many of them fall. And yeah, this one you can see there's like a couple of metal There's Salty's checking it out for us. Metal bars bracing this tree, and it's just got like it's just a beautiful like trunk that it has. But that's a great fact that Lewis and Clark brought Osage oranges back
Yeah,
to
thanks
Jefferson.
for those who can't see that. Mary Jo just shared that Lewis and Clark brought them back from their expedition.
That's great. I'm sure I know Mary has, I'm sure, a lot of great tree facts. Yeah, and this one is just like beautiful, and it's not an official great tree, but I have anointed some trees as great trees on this map, and I thought this one was an especially beautiful example of an Osage orange. And they're not that common in the city. Like there are a few, there's like 3 at least in Prospect Park, but you will know if there was an Osage orange near you in the fall if suddenly there are green alien eggs rolling around on the ground, or if I don't think Derek, my editor for this map, is on this call, but he told me when he was a kid an Osage orange fell on his head and bruised his head, so he was like on the fence about us including Osage oranges on the map because he had some past negative experiences with them. But I was happy to highlight this tree.
Yeah, and Sin, maybe you can turn a little bit so folks can see where you are to orient themselves.
Oh, sure. So we're looking out at the Nether Mead here, which is like a huge meadow. There's a lot of people with their dogs out in the Nether Mead right now, as you can probably see. And then I'm just going to turn in this direction. If I were to keep walking, I would make my way into the ravine, and I don't know if we can see, if you can actually see the Nether Mead
arches
that are here. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's the only 3. It's like the Nether Mead has the arch for people, the waterway, and then the bridle path, right? That's like the
yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm.
The big span. Well, we won't immediately launch into an arch tour, but I would tune into that someday. Oh yeah, that's a perfect view of it too, where you really see like its 2 trunks kind of like dancing together there. Great.
Right.
Well,
thank you, Cindy, for walking with us.
Yeah, no, thank you. This has been a joy. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you, Allison, for joining us today. And to everybody who's here.
Yeah, that's what you said what I was going to say too. I think to everyone. And like, I know we have like a few minutes if there's like any other questions people had about.
Yeah, if anyone has any comments or questions, feel free to drop them into the chat, or any other trees that you want to share. I don't know if people got a sense of, the map itself, but I thought I'd just hold it up and show you. So you have the map of the city. Tell us a little bit about some of the features people can find on the map. So the other here.
It's got like 50 trees, and then we have photographs of some of them, and then descriptions of all 50. And the descriptions kind of range from like, historic notes about the tree. But my hope is that it like just encourages you, whether you're in New York or wherever you are, just to kind of like think about the trees around you and like maybe try to see like whatever is considered a great tree in your city. Like I've been surprised kind of the more I researched it, the more I realized that there were like really remarkable trees that, it's not just like that they're interesting, that they contribute to like biodiversity, which is so important for having a, thriving ecosystem in the city. They're great for birds, they're pollinator, they offer shade, storm water management, all these really essential things. And like, I just think it's like been kind of a nice way lately to think about time too, that, we have our lifespans and trees have another. And I really appreciate that we kind of like witness them at whatever point they're at and kind of think about like that they might see a future we don't, or that they've seen a past that we haven't. So they're kind of like an interesting connection to history too.
Yeah. Oh, that's so wonderful. What a nice way to put it. I mean, that we can also mention the fact that, a lot of the trees on this list are non-native, and just because of landscape practices today, we're just not planting these kinds of trees anymore. So many of them are kind of becoming more and more unique first as we're planting more native trees, but also as the climate changes and trees that were once native are now no longer going to be, propagating and successful in this region.
That's an excellent point. I think at Greenwood Cemetery, Joe Churup, who's like their horticulture guy, planted some live oaks, which are like, a southern tree that he planted them as kind of like an experiment, and they're doing great. Meanwhile, like the beech trees that don't do well in heat are dying. And of course, like there is a sadness to that, but I think it's important to think about how we can adapt and kind of like think about what trees are going to thrive in our future.
Yeah. Last year, we did a program in conversation with Howard Goldstein, who's the forest ecologist for the Prospect Park Alliance, and Justin Bowers, who's from the Natural Areas Conservancy, talking about forest management and planning for climate change. So we'll follow up with everyone, and we'll include a link to watch that program, because it's very much topical, especially on Earth Day. I'll also just mention Mary Jo's other comment. She says your Dawn Redwood description is very much the same story as the Ginkgo tree, and there is a Ginkgo tree on the list. And I'll say that our dog Salty is very appreciative of that, because that is her favorite tree, because she loves to eat and roll in the berries, which are very,
no. Yeah, they the Ginkgo tree in Inwood Park, is that the one? Is
there more than one Ginkgo tree on your list?
Well, yeah, there is too, but like there's also a beautiful one in Prospect Park too that like, yeah, and the Ginkgo, there's a reason that people tend to plant the ones that don't have Ginkgo berries, because they are not in the same like way as the Osage Orange, but a similar sort of like, it's the whole scene when those start to fall. Yeah, and I know Mary Jo, I know you're fans of Ginkgos, and they also are like considered one of those living fossils that like basically haven't changed since dinosaurs were here. And just I love the Ginkgo tree when it's like has that beautiful golden color, and then one day just all the leaves fall and you have like kind of like a carpet of yellow. Yeah, and there's some old examples like in the city, like that kind of mark old estates and stuff. So, but there's so much more than I can fit into an hour. Yeah. That's why I wrote a whole map.
Yeah, well, Allison, thank you so much. This has been such a great conversation, and it's been so wonderful to learn so much and connect with these places and these beautiful creatures. Again, we'll follow up with everyone, so we can share links to your writing and where you can get the map and some related programs. But Allison, thank you so much for celebrating Earth Day with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I'd say, I really appreciate Turnstile Tours. You've been doing great online programming, and I'm happy to be a part of it.
Yeah, and you can follow Allison, visit her website, which we'll post it, again, included in the email, and on social media. You're always posting really beautiful images from Prospect Park, especially.
Yes, especially this past year, mainly Prospect Park. So that's been my commute, that's been my vacations, and it's lovely. I haven't gotten tired of it.
Great. Well, thank you so much, and thank you to everybody for joining us, and have a great evening.
Yeah, you too. Take care.
All right, thanks.
Bye.